All right, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to you guys out there that are watching right now. So, I want to just jump right into the headlining topic of this stream, which is, of course, the fact that, as most of you have probably heard at this point, Nvidia has announced that they are unlaunching the RTX 4080 12 gigabyte variant. And really, they just made this short little blog post a couple of days ago. Hey there. So they did the blog post where they really just mostly said, hey, the graphics card was mislabeled. We definitely wanted to be called something else. Also patted themselves on the back on just the amount of hype that there is for the 4090. And that was about it. Now, not really much info was given there other than the fact that they are going to eventually rename it. Overall, I think it's a good move because of the fact that really it was a horribly named graphics card. Really, never in the history of Nvidia have we had a graphics card that was fundamentally different than the exact same named card that it essentially is. We were essentially going to have two versions of the 4080 that were going to be on completely different dies. They were not the exact same graphics card in any meaningful capacity. So the performance difference between the two was going to be substantially bad. And really, overall, good move here. More than likely, they're just going to end up renaming it to what it should have been, which is just the 4070. Now, the real question is going to be, what is the price point of it going to be? Because still, the price point of the 4080 is looking pretty brutal. $900 for what is a already cut down version of the top end card is pretty rough. And the 4070 is a noticeably cut down version of the 4080. So even if we end up saving $200 on that, that's going to be a extremely brutal cut. It's just not going to be something that's going to be really that viable, that interesting. Honestly, price point can save this product if they actually choose to be aggressive on it. I really don't think that they're going to end up doing that. They have just so many like 3000 series graphics cards that they need to move. I don't think that they're going to get aggressive with their price points, but at least they're going to be properly labeled in terms of naming. Now, the interesting thing about this is how much of a surprise it ended up being to pretty much everyone, not just us as the audience, not just the retailers, but the AIB partners, the people that actually make most of the cards that actually end up selling. They were caught by surprise also by this information. Gamers Nexus actually went into detail, reaching out to some industry contacts. And what they were actually able to find out is that a lot of these AIBs are now having to unpackage these graphics cards and start flashing new BIOSes on them to obviously have them properly labeled and recognized on the actual systems. Obviously, new drivers are going to have to be rolled out that actually properly recognize these as the 4070s that they're probably actually going to end up being. And overall, it was kind of just a crazy move. And really, if this is showing anything, it's that EVGA got out at the right time. They really were in a horrible position, and it seems like a lot of the AIBs are not very happy by what is happening with all of this. In fact, most of them aren't even really that happy with what's happening with the 4090 because the 4090 is already at a price point that is not sustainable for the AIB partners. Now, you might be thinking, how is it that a $1,600 graphics card is unsustainable to these companies? Well, reason being is that Nvidia is practically selling it to them at cost. Because the way that this works is that AIB partners essentially buy the chips themselves in bulk from Nvidia. They get the chips, they put it on the PCBs, they put the cooler and everything on there, and then they sell it to you. So all they're buying from Nvidia is the actual GPU die. And really what ends up happening is that Nvidia is charging them practically the price of what they sell the chip themselves directly to us when we buy a Founders Edition. So for the AIBs, which already have very low margins, the margins for AIB partners are roughly around in the single digit percentages, around 5% most of the time. For them, what did they end up doing? They already spent practically the cost of the entire graphics card just to get the die to actually just get the chip and put it on a PCB. So now they have to pay for the PCB. They have to actually put in a cooler on there, and they have to compete with Nvidia. It's really a rough spot to be in. And really, I was actually looking at a Reddit post that was essentially talking about Gigabyte being extremely unhappy with the current situation. Pretty much going into detail about pricing. Now, this is in European pricing. Europe is, of course, a large market, though. So their pricing already is going to be higher just because of import fees and stuff like that. But in general, it's looking pretty rough. The price for MSRP for a 4090 in Europe in a lot of places seems to be around 2,000 euros, which with the price of the euro right now is extremely brutal. That is a crazy price point. I really don't know who is actually spending that kind of money on these graphics cards, but that is what they're selling them for over there. And really what Gigabyte was essentially saying is that at the price that they're selling at right now, that $2,000, it is impossible for them to make any money off of this. You know, like their most budget orientated SKUs are barely hitting that price point, and price increases are coming along with it, where now the cheapest models are 2,350 euros. That is a ridiculous markup on what is already an extremely expensive product. So in general, it's really looking really, really rough for a lot of markets that have the RTX 4090 launching, because already here in the US, pretty difficult to get your hands on it, and the prices are pretty ridiculous. But outside of here, the rest of the world, you're really getting screwed over when it comes to the prices of these things. Now, it is a high-end graphics card that I think that the vast majority of people should not buy just because it's so grossly expensive, and really going based off the performance numbers that we've seen, it's almost too much performance. You know what I mean? In the sense that if you game at 1080p or you game at 1440p, you're really going to have a severely underutilized GPU. It really is almost designed for 4K 144 hertz, which is a performance category that a vast majority of users out there just don't fall into. Now, obviously, the longevity of a GPU like that is going to be longer because games will become more demanding over the years, and the utilization, even at 1440p and 1080p, will obviously go up. Though I think at 1080p, it really will never get to the point where it will be properly utilized, but still pretty decent performance there. But just in general, the pricing of the 4090 right now is looking really rough. Who knows what the RTX 4080 and 4070 are going to be looking like for the rest of the world, because it really seems like it's going to be very difficult to find any graphics cards that are going to be meaningful outside of the United States that are under 1,000, whatever local currency equivalent would be. So let's say 1,000 euros. Really, overall, a rough situation. It really seems like this generation is targeting a higher end user, a higher income user that really prices out most of us. I mean, a 4070, if we just go based off of what the 12 gigabyte 4080 that has now been unlaunched and will be renamed to a 4070, whatever the price point of that ends up being, the overall performance that we're getting is so cut down compared to the 4090 that it's going to be interesting to see where the price point actually ends up landing. I don't personally think that it's going to be worth it either way. At the prices right now, it really seems like just buying the, I guess at this point, last gen cards is probably the way to go. And even then, that's a kind of a rough recommendation, just because depending on your region, I mean, there are certain parts of Europe right now where if you try to get something like a 3080 or a 3090, it actually ends up being not too far away from the actual price point right now of the RTX 4090. Now, a lot of that has to do with local distributors being mostly very greedy and having a lot of power, where there's a lot of countries actually where there will be one distributor for Nvidia graphics cards. And that one distributor is pretty much putting himself into a position where they kind of own the market. You know, they can set the price points, they can just do whatever they want. The really overall rough situation for pretty much everybody. And it really seems like what's happening here is that Nvidia is trying to push out all of the AIB partners and really eventually switch to a model where they themselves are directly selling the graphics cards to consumers or are just directly selling them to retailers. You know, they already have a agreement with Best Buy where they sell the graphics cards to them directly. Overall, not anything too major. It's just one exclusive deal with a retailer that over the past, 15 years has lost a lot of their clout. So nothing that was too industry shattering, but when all of this, mining craze was happening and these shortages were happening, a lot of the times Best Buy was the cheapest place to actually get a graphics card locally here in the United States. Now, obviously, it's going to be way different in the rest of the world, but as Nvidia really starts to flex its power and really start to tighten control over the overall GPU market that they have, what's going to end up happening is they're going to make these exclusive deals with more and more and more retailers until eventually they pretty much just push out all their AIB partners. Really, the reason being is that they kind of just don't need them at this point. People are more than willing to buy the cards directly from Nvidia. They might as well also get the margin there. Now, it's hard to feel too bad for the AIB partners just because of the fact that a lot of them are already mega corporations that kind of just are involved in a lot of different things, but some of them are smaller companies that will essentially end up suffering greatly from eventually being pushed out of this market. EVGA being one of them, where who knows what the future of EVGA really is at this point. I mean, EVGA was a very well-known brand here in the United States. Outside of the United States, they never really had any large presence because of the fact that they were mostly just US-based. But being US-based, they had the best customer service. I mean, I personally have used EVGA graphics cards and power supplies for years. I mean, I've had, at this point, dozens of them. And anytime I would occasionally have to get an RMA or a fan would fail or something like that, they were very, very quick to provide customer support. They were really understanding. They never really strung you along or anything like that. They were pretty much one of the best. And now that they're out of the market, who knows really what they're going to be able to do, because their power supplies are good, but the power supply market is super competitive. There are just so many different companies involved, so many different brands. It's really one of those things where, especially because of the fact that a lot of these are just ODM products, they go to a already existing manufacturer and tell them, hey, this is what we want. These are the specs that we want. And some other company is the one manufacturing it for them. It really ends up becoming a situation where you can kind of get a power supply from pretty much anyone. The uniqueness that EVGA had was their customer support on their graphics cards. And now that that's gone, really, who knows what the company is going to end up looking like in a year or up to 5 years from now, if they're even still around in 5 years. 5 years is a very long time in the tech industry. Things can change dramatically within that time. In 5 years, Intel could be a dominant player in the GPU market, or they could be completely out of it. Nvidia could have just, at this point, completely dominated and consolidated their power within the GPU market, where they now are selling GPUs directly to people and there are no AIBs, or it could just be a situation where they had to give more power back to their partners. It really all just depends on what the rest of the small amount of competitors end up doing. Now, do I think that AMD is ever going to be really that competitive in the GPU market, at least in terms of sales? Because in terms of performance, they're practically there. The only thing that AMD really falls behind on is just their RTX performance, or rather their RT performance, since RTX is a specific Nvidia brand. But ray tracing and, global illumination, all of that specific technology, AMD right now is pretty far behind even Intel on all of this. Now, is this going to be like that forever? I don't think so, but are they going to be able to catch up? Who really knows? The real reason I'm bringing that up is just because RT in general at this point, even though it's been around for quite a few years, has really not caught on as much as you would have expected, considering how on paper it is a pretty revolutionary technology. RT, like ray trace lighting can look pretty amazing. If you've ever played Metro Exodus Enhanced Edition, it is mind-blowing how much of a difference it makes versus the base game, where it really enhances the overall atmosphere. It is practically a new game, and it really increases the immersion of what can sometimes be a pretty solid horror shooter. But that's one game in a franchise that is not exactly a top seller, in a market where there are dozens of games that come out that are huge every year, and a market where there are overall hundreds and even thousands of games that come out every single year that just end up dominating. So in general, what ends up happening in that situation is, well, RT has no real relevance. But it really doesn't matter, because for AMD, they just have no market share. They really don't. They compete very well in raster performance, which is what's relevant for 99% of customers out there. But it doesn't matter. They don't move units. And so even if AMD is somehow able to compete in terms of performance, which is what they're doing now, or if they're able to actually surpass Nvidia at some point, it doesn't change anything. They won't be able to move the same volume. I mean, at this point, I think it's somewhere almost like 90% of the GPU market is owned by Nvidia. You know, like the hype for their kinds of products is at a level that is just unprecedented. And really, it seems like what AMD mostly actually manages to make their money on is their CPUs. Their GPU division is kind of nothing. But of course, there is this information coming out that AMD is actually cutting down production of their Ryzen 7000 series because the demand is just not there. And it's not that people don't want these products, though I personally am of the belief that most people kind of just overvalue their CPUs. I mean, there's a lot of people out there that have CPUs that are at this point 5, 6, 7 years old. They're still doing perfectly fine in the games that they want to play. Really, if you want improvements in the games that you play right now, get a new graphics card. I can almost guarantee you the CPU you have right now is more than adequate. More than adequate. I mean, people really genuinely think that somehow having a better CPU is going to magically make their overall gaming experience just so much better. That's really not the case at all. It's really not. CPUs are kind of just really, really overvalued by everybody, but in general, people get excited for it, and it really seems to be the big money maker for AMD right now. And really, the demand just is not there because the CPUs are so expensive. $300 for the 7600X is insane. Now, obviously, that's similar to the pricing of the 5000 series, but the 5000 series was grossly expensive for most of its lifetime until Intel actually managed to be competitive with Alder Lake. And it ended up being that Alder Lake was pretty much the way to go if you wanted a budget product. And this time around, it really seems like 13th gen is going to end up being exactly the same situation, where if you actually care about the budget price points, the price points where 90% of the market is going to end up being in, you're going to go with Intel. Because the price points that Ryzen 7000 series are at is insane. I mean, obviously $300 for a 6-core is already insane, but that's not even most of it. It's the fact that the motherboards are so grossly expensive. It blows my mind to think about how expensive this ends up being. Let's go to Newegg right now and actually look at what the motherboards are for. Let's see. AMD motherboards. Look at AM5 motherboards right now. Oh, look at that. The cheapest B650 motherboard is $170. This is more than what I paid for my X470 motherboard when it came out years ago. Now, I bought it at Micro Center. I got it with a CPU combo, so there was a bit of a discount there. But still, ended up actually being more expensive than the higher chipset for a B series here. And this is a cut down version. There's going to be limitations to all of it. There's going to be limitations to the overall performance, the overall amount. Well, not to the performance of the actual chip, but the performance in terms of the PCIe lanes and stuff like that. It's just overall going to already be cut down, and you're paying $170. And that's not even the end of it. So you're already paying for a more expensive motherboard that is cut down compared to, older generations of Ryzen. Already more expensive. And you need to get DDR5 with it. And DDR5 RAM is still extremely, extremely expensive by comparison. It is pretty much to the point where we're all priced out of the market. There's no way that most normal people will be able to actually get this stuff. Now, where is actually the DDR5? I think I'm going to have to actually go over here. Okay, DDR5. And of course, speed also matters with these sticks a lot. So 16 gigabytes already $105. You can get a $5 discount with this kit, and it's not even at the proper speed that Ryzen 7000 really wants you to have. So already slower RAM, you're paying pretty much double what you would be for DDR4. Really, it starts to become so grossly expensive, and 13 gen is still going to support DDR4. And I think that for the vast majority of users out there, it's not going to matter too much. Like, okay, you lose a couple of percentage of points in performance, but outside of that, what does that really matter? What does that really translate to? It really doesn't translate to much. If you're someone that has a lower end GPU, and by lower end, I mean anything below what is essentially a 70 series Nvidia equivalent. So if you have like anything like a 3060, 2060, anything like that, you're pretty much at a position where your CPU and RAM speed is not going to really affect much. So Raptor Lake really is starting to look like it is going to be the budget buyer's saving grace. And overall, an interesting turn of events where AMD has really just become the premium brand here. But the thing is if you look at the performance charts, and obviously 13th gen isn't out yet, but if you look at the performance numbers that they're showing, if you look at the performance numbers that we have in comparison to Alder Lake, there really is not that much of a difference. And the real champion of all of this is, of course, the 5800 X3D. This right here kind of just absolutely destroys any semblance or idea of getting, the new generations of CPUs. Because if you're on AM4 right now, there is literally no reason whatsoever to upgrade unless you know that the workload that you're doing requires more cores. This is 8 cores, 16 threads. That is going to be good for pretty much every game out there. Every single game. You will find maybe 1 or 2 outliers in the entire gaming industry that will benefit from more cores than this. Because you got to understand that we're talking about 16 threads here. Now, obviously, threads aren't the equivalent to cores, but for the most part in games, they don't really get utilized hard enough to really matter. There is no game really out there that is going to be CPU starved with this. Especially because the cache size of this is so good that there are certain games where it does just better than the 7000 series. And Alder Lake is also a viable option if you're on the budget and you are looking for something brand new to buy. Alder Lake is not a bad choice, especially because Alder Lake gives you the option to eventually upgrade to 13th gen. Now, 13th gen is going to launch. It's probably going to be a bit more expensive and all of that. You don't need to get that at launch. Because again, if you're buying at the lower end of the market, it's more than likely because you have the GPU performance where it doesn't really matter what CPU you have. As long as you have enough cores, games will be perfectly happy. And that's really all that ends up mattering there. And a 6-core is more than enough for pretty much every game out there. And 8 cores like this that has SMT is going to be pretty much perfect. There's not going to be a need for any more. Now, the price point that you see here is not even the most accurate price point of what you can get this for, because this is, of course, a third-party seller. I'm guessing Newegg has them out of stock right now. But even then, at $382, still ends up being a overall better price than what it would be to just get this from, or to get a 7000 series with a new button motherboard, with new RAM, and overall just end up spending a lot more money to get practically the equivalent performance of this. So if you're buying new, I'd look into Alder Lake, maybe look into AM4, but really AM4 at this point is a dead platform. I think Alder Lake is really the way to go if you're shopping right now. Right now. Really, only reason being is that you can eventually upgrade to 13th gen if you need to, if you can find a good deal on it. But overall, again, if you get something like the 12400, that's it. That's kind of all you need. Like the overclocking ability of, something like the 12600K, you're just not going to need. You really, really don't need unless you have a actually high-end graphics card. And if you have a high-end graphics card, these are not the price points that you're going to be shopping in anyway. Although I do think that pairing something like a 3080 and something like the 12400 is probably money better spent than pairing a 3080 with something like a 12900K. Because if you're just gaming, you don't need all those cores. You don't need all those threads. You just don't. There's no games that utilize all of that. This is the sweet spot right here. 8 cores, 16 threads. You will never run into any issues with any game that requires more cores or anything like that. That just doesn't exist. There's no games that utilize CPUs like that. And the cache size of this pretty much just dominates in a lot of games, to the point where really AMD kind of has shot themselves in the foot with releasing this product, because it pretty much made the 7000 series irrelevant. I mean, to the point where they have to just cut down the amount that they're ordering, because really what this mostly just shows is that they've priced out a lot of their customers to the point where people just cannot spend the money for it. People just, they can't. The motherboards can't become cheaper because it is just more complex to really put together a AM4 motherboard, because of the higher, the newer generation of PCI Gen 5 pretty much ends up requiring more complex designs just to be able to actually, properly carry that bandwidth and all of that. And overall, while the quality of motherboards has gone up, it has priced out most people. So really, it really just seems like the next gen is completely based off of the idea of making the average consumer kind of just stick with an older generation. And in general, it's a rough situation to be in, like if you're someone that's excited by technology, if this is what you really enjoy, you're priced out. You no longer can be a customer. They don't want you around. They want the people that have the money to be able to actually, pay for these. And it's kind of insane. It really is a insane situation to be in, where PC gaming is getting to the point where it is so expensive. You even want to be on the latest generation, where it can really push people to just go onto consoles. And it's a rough spot. Of course, all of that is just based on the fact that if you want to be on the latest and greatest. And the thing is that when you really look at the overall market of PC gaming, we're actually in a pretty good spot. If we look at the 12400 from Intel, at this price, solid deal. Solid overall product here. I wish it could be down to 150, but more than likely during Black Friday here in the United States, you'll be able to get that already. It has a $10 off coupon there. Overall solid deal. The biggest benefit of this, of course, is the prices of motherboards. They're going to be just overall cheaper. Overall going to be a much better market to end up getting into. Because if we look at the lowest price ones, look at that. Now, obviously, these are the most cut down chipset. Really doesn't matter too much, though, for a product like this. Like, realistically, you kind of just throw the CPU in there. It doesn't need to be overclocked. You kind of just end up being limited by the amount of USB ports and stuff like that. But we quickly start to get into the B series here, and it's sub $100. Sub $100 B series boards. That is not something that you can say for the 7000 series from AMD. Now, these are, of course, DDR4, but DDR4 RAM is cheaper. And the overall performance impact, like I said, if you are on a GPU that a normal person would have, like a 30 series, or rather a 60 series, like a 3060, 2060, even if you have like a 2070, you're in a position where it doesn't matter. DDR4 versus DDR5 is not going to change anything. It just ends up being cheaper. For the price of essentially 16 gigabytes of DDR5, you can get yourself some really, really nice 32 gigabytes of DDR4. And having more of that RAM in a lot of games is actually going to be more beneficial. If you're someone that plays Escape from Tarkov, having more RAM and more cache on your CPU will overall make your experience overall better than if you actually upgraded your GPU. It's one of those rare games where having a better CPU, quote unquote, is actually overall going to improve your experience way more than upgrading your GPU. Now, the 5800 X3D is pretty much the most ideal CPU for Escape from Tarkov, but that's just one game. Just one game. Overall, the performance that we get out of this generation right here from Intel is just so good. It's just so good in comparison to everything else. I am a big fan of where CPUs are at right now, just because for the average consumer, you actually end up getting some pretty solid performance here, where in most games, it's going to be indistinguishable to pair this with the 12400F than if you got a 7000 series CPU. Now, of course, all of this changes if you actually care about multi-threaded performance, if you're doing this for your job. This is completely just based off of gaming performance that I'm talking about. If you care about gaming performance, then honestly, even going back as far back into the 10th gen from Intel, the performance difference is just not substantial enough for 1080p or even 1440p to justify wanting to upgrade and spend so much money on a new motherboard, new RAM, and of course the new CPUs that are just in general more expensive. Now, and of course, we have been able to also get the R5 5600. It has at some points been selling for as low as $100. This is a really good deal right here, by the way. $130 for it. My biggest issue with it, just in general, is the fact that you're buying into AM4. AM4 being a dead platform. At this point, if you go at least with Alder Lake, you do have another generation of products. You know, you have the 13th gen to actually be able to upgrade to. With this, that's it. You know, you get this and you'll never be able to upgrade past this. In general, though, the level of performance you get out of this is just going to be more than adequate enough. Really, the main reason that I just say go with Intel is just because of the fact that you at least get one more generation of support. If that does not matter to you, if you're one of those people where you buy these things and you just hold on to it for the next 5 to 10 years, it's a pretty compelling offer. You know, you get this, you get yourself a cheap AM4 motherboard, get yourself some cheap DDR4 RAM. Obviously not too cheap. Speed really matters in this situation. But get yourself a nice kit of, you know, just 3200 megahertz at the minimum. If you can get 3600 megahertz, then go with that. But get yourself a 16 gigabyte kit, or if you want 32 gigabyte kit, and you're set. You're pretty much set for a really long time, especially if you're gaming at 1080p. And of course, if you don't have a super high-end graphics card. So in general, the market is interesting because if you're looking to get the higher end, higher generation, you know, more recent products, it actually does end up looking pretty bad. But if you actually look at the products that are available out there and you're not someone that is looking for the latest and greatest, there is really good deals to be had there, you know, because again, the performance of this, if you don't have something like a 3090, you know, if you don't have a super high-end GPU, I can almost promise you, you will not find a difference in terms of performance between this and something like the 7600X when you're gaming. Because you just don't have the GPU to fully utilize the CPU, and that's perfectly fine. You're already going to be able to pretty much game at 1080p at 144 hertz with something like this. Do you need any more than that? You know, for a game like Valorant, for a game like CS, you don't need more than this. And those are the games where that high FPS really matters. So in general, it's just the CPU market can look rough because of the pricing of, you know, the newest generation of products. But in general, there are good deals to be had there. Just don't look at the latest and greatest. Look a generation back. The performance uplifts aren't noticeable enough to really make it so that this is an unviable product. This isn't suddenly bad because 7000 series exists. And of course, if you're just looking to get something where you really aren't going to have to upgrade for a really long time, then yeah, just go with the 58. You know, you just go with the 5800 X3D. That's it. You're done. You're pretty much done for another probably 2 to 3 generations. And when I mean by like you're done for 2 to 3 generations, it's just like if you're someone that like really looks at like high-end performance stuff, like, because you get this, you will pretty much more than likely not have to upgrade for like another like 5 years at the minimum, because games just are not utilizing more and more cores. You know, there are limitations overall to parallelization of what games do, because multi-core performance and stuff like that really only matters in situations where it's easy to parallelize the workload. And that is not something that you can do with gaming, because gaming is super dynamic. Like, you know, gaming is kind of just like all over the place. Gaming pretty much just has a lot of things happening in one go. But yeah, pretty much just ended up going on a tangent there of Zen 4. But in general, it's just one of those things where it's really on my mind a lot, just looking at these newer generation of stuff, because it can be pretty rough to look at the pricing and kind of feel like you're being priced out. Hey there, Elite. How you doing, bud? But really, overall, the news that we just keep getting from the next gen of products looks pretty rough. It is pretty rough. Obviously, it could be better. You know, news article here from Tech Power Up also going into detail about how the PC market is pretty much on track for a post-pandemic correction. We're pretty much witnessing that at this point. There was a huge high that ended up happening for the overall semiconductor industry because of the fact that what ended up happening with the pandemic is everyone needed a new computer, everyone needed a new laptop, everybody needed a new system. And that is pretty much over at this point, because if you're someone that bought a laptop or bought a PC or anything like that during COVID, I mean, you're kind of already set. You're not really looking to upgrade. You're not really looking to spend money, especially now that we're going into a post-pandemic recession. And so what is happening here is that all the people that were working from home now have PCs that they don't need. They're going back to their offices because obviously these companies just feel like they need to validate their existence by forcing you to go to an office. And the fact that the crypto boom is just over at this point, it has created a situation where these companies that went from, making certain amounts of money, that was reasonable, to suddenly making ridiculous amounts of sales, to the point where if you look at the overall PC industry, sales have actually been going down over the last pretty much 2 decades, mostly because people don't really buy desktops. People kind of just buy laptops. And once you buy a laptop, you kind of just hold on to it for as many years as you can. If you could squeeze out 4 to 5 years out of it, you're more than happy. And in this situation here, now that everybody's bought new laptops, everybody's bought new PCs, people kind of just aren't looking to buy anything new, especially because the newer stuff is so expensive. So we're looking into essentially seeing a huge correction in the overall PC market. There is no way that current pricing is sustainable. I don't see a world where the price points that we currently have right now are sustainable in any meaningful capacity. There's just no way. You can't be selling graphics cards at the price points that they are right now. You can't be selling CPUs at the price points that they are. It's just one of those things where it's an overall rough spot to be in for the semiconductor industry. Razer launched a new gaming Steam Deck. Yeah, I actually saw that. I actually saw a news article talking about that. I don't know if it's actually here on the subreddit. Yeah, here it is. Verizon and Razer unveil Razer Edge 5G. Yeah, this is interesting because to me, now obviously outside of the United States, mobile gaming is huge. Here in the United States, mobile gaming and gaming phones and stuff like that, really there's no market for it. There just isn't. People here don't mobile game. People play on consoles. People play on, all kinds of other devices. They don't really play mobile games enough to just do this. Hey there. But in general, it's interesting, but like the focus on cloud is what kind of confuses me. Like they kind of just like were originally talking about how it would be like a very streaming focused thing, but obviously you could still play, local games on it. It's interesting. Because to me, there are no mobile games that justify this existing. There just isn't. But emulation is a thing. And with emulation, this actually seems pretty cool to me, I actually really like Razer's phones also. Like Razer has some pretty solid phones, at least in terms of build quality. Now, this is running on the Snapdragon G3X Gen 1. The 5G phone, 5G coverage, at least here in the United States, is very iffy anyway. But of course, the big focus that they were really talking about was, just like cloud gaming, using the Xbox Cloud, using Nvidia's GeForce Now. Even talking about like using Moonlight and Parsec, which is interesting because I actually have used Moonlight before. I don't know if you guys have ever used anything like that, but I really like Moonlight. Moonlight pretty much is just a way for you to use, similar to what Shadowplay uses for, like recording. You're just using the Nvidia encoder, or really the built-in encoder on any of your GPUs, and using that to essentially stream games onto your phone or your tablet or anything like that. I've actually used it a couple of times because if you have any modern smartphone at this point, whether it's Android or iOS, you can actually hook up a Xbox controller to it over Bluetooth, and it'll recognize X input perfectly fine. So you get something like this, you start using some emulators. That's actually a pretty awesome device. Now, price point is of course the most important thing, but we do have a 6.8-inch AMOLED display. Love to see it. AMOLED displays are just gorgeous, all the way up to 144 hertz. Bit of a gimmick there. Not really very many mobile games that can go all the way up to that refresh rate. So not really like as big of a selling point there. Not to mention that higher refresh rates on phones actually end up using up more battery. So it's one of those things where you are sacrificing some battery life for a refresh rate that realistically you're not going to need for most games. But really, it is a super cool product. I'm really into the idea of more devices coming out being handheld like this, specifically because at least on Android, emulation is really impressive. You throw Dolphin on this, you could play Melee on this. Just think about that. You have now portable Super Smash Brothers Melee. That is actually just crazy. It's because the controller actually looks nice. Like these controls look pretty solid. Like obviously you have to hold the thing to really be able to judge it. And really the thumbsticks is the thing that I'm the most curious about. But I would actually really like to try one of these. And really, while I think that things like, Xbox Cloud Gaming and, GeForce Now, I'm not sold on them really. I'm still interested because Steam's cloud, or rather Steam's like in-home streaming, Moonlight, Parsec, and all of that, they can actually be pretty interesting. If you're, just wanting to play a game in bed, you just bust this bad boy up, you boot up whatever game you want using, any of those, it'll launch on your main PC, and you could just play it on in bed. That would actually be super, super cool. I like that feature a lot. It's really awesome. So there is some viability to this. I actually really enjoy it. The specs of it, a little iffy, just because of the fact that, the higher refresh rate is more than likely not going to be necessary. Although you can actually stream at higher refresh rates, but a lot of the times for the games that you want that high refresh rate, the input lag that will come from, the Wi-Fi signal is already going to be kind of a deal breaker. But in general, really, really solid performance here. At least on paper, it looks like it's going to be interesting. I would love to see some benchmarks on how this is going to do. I'm a bit iffied out by their emphasis on cloud streaming, but I think it really just comes down to the fact that this is almost too good for mobile gaming, We could see here like the little launch trailer that they have. And keep in mind, there have been mobile handheld like gaming consoles like this from Android devices for a really long time now. They've just been around for a really long time, but no major companies have really jumped into this. This is pretty much one of the more higher profile companies actually jumping in and doing something like this. I mean, the controller is really the thing that matters the most, at least to me. And it looks like it'll at least be interesting. I would definitely love to get my hands on one of these and try it out. Because really, that's probably one of the more interesting products coming out there. Really interesting stuff. But in general, there's not much that I'm hyped for, just because I don't know if I would pick that up over getting a Steam Deck, really. Because being an Android powered device, you're kind of limited by what you can do. Because yeah, okay, you can stream your games onto it. Already, if you're using something like the Xbox streaming, or if you're using something like GeForce Now, for the vast majority of users, it's not really going to be something that they care about. Like the streaming services like that just really haven't taken off yet. So the biggest benefit is streaming your own games that you already have at home, but that requires you to already have a gaming PC that can actually do that kind of thing. So with that being the case, then I think that overall getting a Steam Deck is more than likely going to be a better option, especially because the lowest end Steam Deck is more than likely going to be cheaper than this. I mean, did they give a price point on this? Actually, I didn't really see that. Oh, and it's also a Verizon exclusive here in the United States, which is super tragic because Verizon is grossly expensive. But I wonder if you'll be able to buy like third-party versions of it, or rather like unlocked versions outside of like the United States. It might be like just a super, super niche product. But in general, pretty interesting. Pretty interesting. And 128 gigabytes of storage is nice to see. It's one of those things where the emphasis on streaming would pretty much make you think like, oh man, are they going to cheap out on storage? But honestly, 128 gigabytes is like at this point the minimum that I think most phones should just launch with anyway. And it does support Wi-Fi 6E, which is good to see because Wi-Fi 6E, while grossly expensive to get the routers for, does actually provide some insanely low latency for something like this. So really, really cool stuff in general. Love to see it. But yeah, outside of that, the whole tech market is looking really, really rough for the budget consumer. Now, one thing that I had seen also that I thought was interesting was the fact that AMD is pretty much launching multiple generations of their Zen cores with the 7000 series mobile. Which, the mobile stuff is the things that I pretty much pay the most attention to. And here you can go and actually look. So, pretty much for the 7000 series of mobile from AMD, we are looking at 3 different generations of Zen cores. That is, to me, absolutely insane. 3 whole generations going from Zen 4, Zen 3, and Zen 2. And the whole product stack is kind of all over the place. This is, of course, for the mobile variations, the U series here. And really going down to the lowest ones being the Ryzen 3 7420U and the Ryzen 5 7520U being Zen 2 cores paired with RDNA 2 graphics. Then we have the Ryzen 5 7630 that is a Zen 3 core with Vega graphics. And the Ryzen 5 7640U, which is Zen 4 paired with RDNA 3. So this will be the highest end variation. This is overall very concerning. Now, as more information comes out on this, I will focus more on talking about this, but just briefly going over what we know right now. They are mixing 3 generations of products, and they're really all over the place, where you're going to be able to get Zen 2 with RDNA 2, Zen 3 with Vega, and of course Zen 4 with an actual proper pairing with RDNA 3. The biggest issues that I have is these 3 right here. Now, Zen 2 paired with RDNA 2, that's fine. It's not amazing, but Zen 2 should be more than fine enough to pair with an iGPU. You're not really going to run into any games that are going to be like, oh man, a Zen 2 core, I'm not really going to be able to do anything with this, because we're talking about RDNA 2 here. It is an iGPU at the end of the day. So the performance that it's going to give you is not going to be enough to really bog down a Zen 2. The one I'm the most concerned about is the potential of a Ryzen 5 7630U. This is, of course, just a leak right now. But if this turns out to be a real product, we're looking at Zen 3 paired with Vega, which means Vega, this geriatric architecture, is still dragging along. It's still somehow relevant in some capacity, in the sense that it's still being released, even though I think it needs to be just put out to pasture at this point. And it's being paired with Zen 3, so you're getting better CPU performance, better CPU efficiency than Zen 2 here, but at a drastically reduced GPU level of performance. So realistically, if you're looking to game, something like the 7520U will actually perform better than the 7630U. Because for the vast majority of users, Zen 2 is more than enough. Zen 1 is already more than enough for a lot of users out there. Now, if you just want a game, Zen 2 paired with RDNA 2 will be a much better product than Zen 3 paired with Vega. So in general, this is just almost a potential disaster in terms of letting budget consumers actually get something that is relevant. What I'm most curious to see is what price points these are going to end up hitting versus the 7630U. These two in particular, how are they going to compete with each other? What are the prices going to end up being? Now, obviously, this is all just rumor right now. It's one of those things where we're going to have to just see where things actually end up landing in all of this. But it seems that, at least based off of the leaked info from ASRock's website, it will actually end up being a thing. We'll have to wait and see. But in general, crazy stuff. But anyways, I have to run for now, guys. So that will be the end of this stream. We'll go into more detail talking about this in the next one. More than likely, it'll either be later today or it will be tomorrow. I'm trying to figure out a good stream time. But anyways, I want to thank you for watching. And of course, if you're just watching the VOD of this, which more than likely you are, I want to thank you for making it this far. Obviously, I have a goal right now of trying to get enough to buy a A750 from Intel. Would love to be doing some testing on that. I think I could be pretty invaluable in actually covering a bunch of different games and helping Intel actually improve those drivers, because we definitely need more competition in the market. So if you would like to help with that, you can always hit the donation button down below and give a tip. You can also do that even if this is just a VOD. It will actually track it, so the next time that I go live, it will actually show the result on there. So I would really appreciate if you would help with that. And I will see you guys in the next one.